Hey, everybody, welcome back. I'm Emily Moyer, and this is Strange Mosaic, and I am really excited about today's show. This is a person that I don't know if many of you are familiar with, but I'm surprised that you're not, and you should be if you aren't. I've been listening to him for years, ever since my good friend Elisa E., who my audience is very familiar with, author of the books Our Life Beyond MK Ultra. She sent me a video of his back in 2017 in the fall, and I was in San Francisco by myself for a couple of days, and I was walking around just like out on a walk, and I was listening to this on my earphones, and I was at that moment like, this guy gets this exactly better than anyone else. And I've listened to him on and off over the years since then. And I still think that, and his awareness and his knowledge continues to expand, continue to grow. And he does, in my opinion, a better job of explaining really difficult to understand concepts to everyday people. So from the outstanding and totally underwatched YouTube channel, Lookoutfa Charlie. Charlie, welcome to Strange Mosaic. Nice to have you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. All right. So my friend Elisa, who I don't know if you're familiar with her. She probably has written like one of the most gruesome books about her experience in MK Ultra kind of programming, right? This is not like sort of the, semi-disturbing, semi-glamorous kind of thing you get from some people who write books or report these things. And when you get that, even, it's not that there isn't truth to their story, but it's been portrayed in a certain way to project a certain image. Her stuff is like gritty and difficult, and she recommended your work to me, so I know she's listened to you. And when she sends me something, particularly when it concerns the topic that you deal with, like, it's generally very good, and I listen and I was like, wow. I had recently kind of gotten to the same place that you were, just in terms of like understanding how what's going on inside the body works outside the body. So like, what's the system being built inside of our body and being fed and encouraged both by like our, whatever our natural body setup is, but also the things we eat, works in tandem with the developing technology, both inside and then outside with sonic weaponry, and how not only like what is really happening, but then the sort of architecture of the story around it has created like this myth or this legend that is actually like a self-perpetuating mind control loop, right? And listening to you talk, you like hit all the points that I had kind of come to on my own, and I was like, wow, this guy's really good. Can you just start off by telling us a little bit about yourself, how you got into talking about sonic weaponry, ELF, like bacteria, fungus, like nano-tech in the body, like how you got into all of this, and just sort of whatever your kind of opening statement would be to someone who might be familiar sort of with the topic, but hasn't listened to you talk about it before.
Right. Okay. Well, how I got into it was actually a slow process. And what I went through was, let's say back in 97, 98, stopping at a gas station and grabbing a bag of chips. I would grab a bag of chips or whatever, and I'd sit there, be eating it, and it would immediately start making my stomach churn and cramp and do really weird stuff that it shouldn't be doing from a potato chip. That same thing happened with like Ritz crackers and other weird stuff, like different foods. So I knew right away then that something was changing in the food itself.
So you had been able to eat those things before, and suddenly at a certain point in time, the experience changed.
Yeah, they were talking about changing ingredients, and they were talking about adding different things, and they were taking away certain oils and adding certain oil. You know what I'm talking about?
Absolutely.
So it progressed, and I had never had an allergy. I was an active, BMX rider my entire life, and then all of a sudden I can't eat these foods because they're churning, my stomach. Mm-hmm. And then I started noticing like spots on my face or dry spots on my skin where certain things would happen. But as far as the actual sonic weapons go, long time ago, someone was sleeping in my house, and for about 3 weeks, this is well over a decade ago, for about 3 weeks, it was a progression. They started mumbling in their sleep, and then it became full on talking every night, maybe 5-6 hours a night, that like they were having full on like awake conversations to the point where sometimes I thought they were talking to me.
Okay.
Right. So as a joke, this was totally a joke. I recorded these conversations. And the first time I went back, I was trying to listen to who they were talking to and what they were talking about, because I was going to play it for them the next day and totally make fun of her for it. Right. Well, I
Yep.
started hearing these voices talking back and forth in the recording.
That weren't
And
her. That weren't her.
right, that
Yeah.
were in between her talking, that were almost sounded to me as though they were interacting with her. So then I thought I absolutely left my TV on in the other room, and it was coming through when I boosted it up. So of course I knew that she was going to talk in her sleep the next night, because this was happening every single night. So the next night I recorded and made sure that everything was off. I mean, everything was off. And as soon as she started to talk, I got it all down. I knew that there was no sound going on. I don't live in an apartment, I live in a house. And then I went through it again, and it was the exact same thing. But it was technology. I could hear that this wasn't paranormal. This wasn't ghosts or ghouls or, goblins. This was something else. And it didn't sound totally human. It sounded really like monotone and kind of weird. And what it sounded like was almost like a MIDI voice, or like a computer voice rather than an actual voice. But it was going back and forth, and it was talking about at one point I remember catching that it was talking about like hypnotizing or something like that. And then at another point in the recording, it was saying something about demons. And coincidentally, the next night she woke up screaming and talking in her sleep because there was this demon running after her to get her, right? But it wasn't demonic at all. You could actually hear the tech sounds and the interference in the recording. And I spent probably 3 weeks going through that recording, pulling it all out and pushing it up. And the more I dug, the more I couldn't. I thought something was. I was like, "Am I really over reading this?" Because the more I dug, even those noises underneath that sounded like more voices. So it wasn't until later that I realized that the actual voices and the signals are just ELF voices and more layers of voices, creating this bed of noise for it to ride on. You get what I mean? So it's
Yep.
like just layer after layer after layer in every frequency band, just like sine wave speech. It's just layers of this.
So it's as if like when you're listening, let's say you're just listening to the regular radio in the car, you're listening to one station. So you're not thinking about that there's conversations happening on all the other stations. But if simultaneously you could hear all the radio stations playing at once, it would be
Right.
like, yeah. Okay.
Right. It's exactly like that.
Okay.
So yeah, I as I was getting into that, it was probably 2 months, and at that point of figuring it out, I was blasted with this artificial tinnitus at about 3 p.m. one day that sounded like an 8,000 hertz tone and an 11,000 hertz tone together. And it was just really bizarre. It was almost like someone had shined a light on me.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And then after that, that was when my skin started to get weird. I started to get like weird, like edemas that I never had in my life. Totally healthy guy, going to the doctor, and they're asking me questions.
You say edemas? You said edemas, right?
Yes.
Okay, edemas. Okay, go ahead.
The doctors were asking me if I had been out of the country because it looked like a parasite to them,
Mm-hmm.
for what was going on. And then I started getting what people would call Morgellons symptoms that were resembling Morgellons, that
Right.
were like, open sores, just like I literally looked like a drug addict and I didn't use drugs. So it was just and at that point, everything that I had been suspecting before started being solidified in my mind.
Okay.
And then go ahead.
Real quickly. So 1997 period of time, you notice something changing in how your body is responding to and processing
You're right.
kinds of foods. Then sometime around that period, maybe a little later, you had the experience with the woman in your house.
Yeah, it was later.
Okay.
Yep.
And then when did you have this situation with edemas and open sores on the body?
Okay, so this happened, the tinnitus happened while I was investigating the artificial tinnitus. That came out of nowhere. And then it wasn't 3 or 4 months later that everything was happening with my body after I was hit by the artificial tinnitus.
And what year was that? And if the food was in 97-ish, when was that?
2008 or 9, maybe.
Gotcha.
Maybe earlier.
No, okay. I'm just tracking because I have my own timeline with similar things, and I wanted to just kind of see.
Oh, right. Yeah. Well, I had an experience in Florida in '94. I was really young, but probably just out of high school. But I noticed that I had these weird dry spots of skin on my face that I had never had before, and 2 friends in the same house that we were staying in both blew up like they had been poked with a fish, like they were having a shellfish reaction.
Yeah.
And had to go to the emergency room and be given steroids to get their heads deflated because they were literally swelling up. So yeah, there's a lot. We got into it, but yeah, that's basically the timeline.
Okay, so that's interesting because if you track some of the well-known, right, and we'll start tying tying together what's going on in the body with what the sort of sound and the radio frequency in a little bit. But 1994 is like when people really first started reporting that stuff related to what people call chemtrails or geoengineering,
right?
And that's like when that seems to be like the first date you can trace it to, like a corporation rather than like a military operation through Evergreen Corporation in just above Tucson, Arizona. That I first noticed chemtrailing. I was living there in 1997 in Tucson, Arizona for a period of time. And that was the first place I ever saw it. Right. When I was little, there had been sky riding, like when you would go to the Dodger game.
Yes.
Like in Los Angeles, you'd go to the Dodger game and they'd have some writing in the sky.
Right. Marry me, Jill, or whatever. Right.
Correct. And then here, like when I was living in Tucson, I was noticing that these things, I'm like, well, why are they writing in the sky if they're not writing anything that I can read? Right. That means anything.
Right. That's what happened to me. I saw them in Florida once and then it went away. So I thought it was just something in Florida. But then I was back in Michigan and the same thing happened. I stood in the parking lot of my friend's apartment building, waiting, looking off in the distance, waiting to see what they were going to write. But the plane just kept going straight.
Yeah.
And I was totally waiting to see them, write, like come to Tiger Stadium or whatever they were going to write in the air.
Yeah.
But it didn't happen. Right.
Okay, so then you had your experience with the food like in the late 90s, and I would agree that there was a big transition in the late 90s into the early 2000s in terms of like food ingredients, and that has just accelerated since then, right?
Absolutely.
And then what you're talking about in terms of some of the other stuff, like with the sound and then your skin, like that period of time, 2007, 8, 9, like there's something in my kind of thing that tracks a huge shift then. Can I just ask you, and this is not like, I'm just like, have you ever been a drug user?
I experimented with like pot, but never hard, like heavy drugs. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And so so for you, the more like, okay, I had the first thing on my skin, right, that I didn't understand actually in like that 1994 period. And what it was, and I still have the scars on my arm from where it was It was an octagon, like something that looked like an octagon piece of glitter.
Yeah.
Right? And it was like, but it was kind of big. It looked like a piece of confetti from like a child's
Sure.
party,
Yep.
right? And
I know exactly what you're talking about.
And it was like there was this lump on the skin. It looked kind of like a wart was developing, but it never did. And I fiddled with it and fiddled with it and fiddled with it. And this thing that looked like a piece of confetti or glitter came out, right? And I was just like, that's weird. How'd that get in there, right? Like, I didn't think anything of it except for it grew again, right? Like they kept coming, like every few months, the bump would come back and another one of these things would come out. And like, okay, like whatever. I didn't think much of it. I went on with my life. And then, later, sort of in around the 1990, I had the experience with the chemtrails that I told you about. And then in 1999, somewhere around 1999, 2000, I was living here in Austin where I live now, but I've lived many of other places since then. And I was introduced to meth, right? And I used meth on and off for many, many years after that, right? And so, and it's fascinating that like a lot of the, so what you said that with the Morgellons, like you looked like a drug user, right? You weren't a drug user, right? So what's interesting is like I started using meth then, and I didn't look like what someone would call a drug user until many, many years later. That didn't start happening with my skin until at that same period of time you're talking about, 2006, 7, 8, right? And so like, I guess there's a couple of things here, like obviously, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm assuming that you're thinking that a lot of whatever this stuff is, or at least the things that make up the action and the reaction are coming from the sky.
Oh, right? Absolutely. And
Okay.
I've proven that with the neighbor's house in my area. So every the north side of every
videos,
it's you can tell because it's the way it's falling. I do a lot of painting, and it falls just like spray paint. So if you put a ledge out and put it over a board, it will fall onto those. It will fall onto the board, but not underneath where the ledge is. Right. You get what I'm saying? So it is definitely coming from the air. It is definitely coming from the air.
And so that's like, so to me, some of the funny stuff in the body and the funny stuff in the skin and whatever started actually about 2006, 7. And then 2000, a little bit late, it advanced, right? And I'm kind of the belief that they experimented with it in the drugs before they started dropping it.
It's funny that you mentioned that because I was trying to find the link. I've done a lot of meth studying. We don't have meth in Michigan. Not that I've heard of. It's not big. There's a lot of coke, there's a lot of heroin. Got a lot of friends that died from heroin. I like the wine. I was always happy with wine, and I could get it at any time of the day or night. But it's very strange because, like you said, you brought up the past. So when we're talking about the mid 90s, we've got HAARP and chemtrails began, and HAARP came online, and that's when people began to hear the hum everywhere. And then instead of realizing that it was something scientific going on, nefarious, people said that there were vortexes where they could really hear it. I heard there's some vortexes in Sedona, Arizona. It's like, no, that's probably HAARP. So these ELFs are banging off, but then you get into that period later, 2006, 2007, where Wi-Fi and this infrastructure has finally blanketed the nation in almost every inch of the nation. And these signals are propagating everywhere, especially in those areas, but they are everywhere. It's almost like there's two arms to this. But then you have meth, and I've studied meth users and what they experience, and what they say they experience is almost identical to what other people that are being electronically targeted, quote unquote, if you want to call it that are sensitive to these fields are experiencing as well. And it's like they experience it, and then when they're not on meth anymore, it tends to go away. Not always, but most of the time, their quote unquote TI experiences are while they're on meth. So is it the lithium and the chemicals in the methamphetamine that is making them sensitive to these waves, or my question is that I haven't figured it out yet, or is it the chemicals in the brain changing, and because these ELF signals can lock onto dopamine and other things, is it because of that?
Right.
You get what I'm saying? There
Totally.
are two ways this could work, but absolutely. And I've seen meth users that are sane in every way, but when they use meth, it's like they become like a mega antenna.
Correct. Okay, so there's a couple of things. Like there's a variety of stuff going on here, right? Because I started using meth before I got into any conspiracies or waking up or anything like that, right? And I used meth on and off from like 1999 or 2000 until 2015. And then after 2015, I've never used it again. But there was a change. It changed. And people say like, okay, well, that can be like the progression of drug addiction, right?
Yeah.
But my use of meth over the course of those years was pretty consistent in that, like, I was like a kind of a binge user. I wasn't like an everyday user. I was a binge user. So I'd do it for like 3-4 days, maybe a week or something like that. And then I wouldn't do it for a couple of weeks, and then I'd do it again. So I always had uptime and downtime, right? And I was a person who took pretty good care of myself. Other than that, for most of the time that I did it, like towards the very, very end, like there was a lot of other things going on and whatnot. But there was a big difference that happened. That the meth began to change in about the 2005 to 7 time period. And it went from being what I would say was an analog experience to a digital experience.
Sure. Yeah. And it's funny because those years line right up with the opioid epidemic, so then you have, all these people that suddenly can't be happy unless they are using opioids, and so it's almost like the ELF and these frequencies I totally believe are interfering with the human mind and the way the human mind functions. They were saying that about the Russian woodpecker.
Yeah.
And what looks like it's happening is that people are becoming depressed, feeling down, feeling like they can't be happy, and then they use these drugs to get them happy, and either the ingredients in the drugs or what is happening to their inside their brain is causing them to become antennas for these frequencies to do even more harm.
So I think what you're saying is like, I think that some of the ingredients that were always there, but I actually think, like, it is my opinion, right, that whatever this sort of bacteria, fungusy kind of thing, you call it what do you say?
Shewinella and like a GMO fungus. They're both GMOs because Shewinella is the most programmable. They programmed Shewinella to dump in the ocean and eat oil spills.
Yes. Okay. So
stuff like that.
Shewinella and this GMO fungus that you've also talked about, there's like a fungal graphene kind of thing, right? Yep. Like, I think that there was that in the meth at a certain point because
absolutely, I believe it.
Something like this is my experience with just reality and researching things, and with this is that if there's something they want to try, they'll first try it on a group of people that nobody cares about and that everyone thinks is crazy anyway.
Right, because anything that happens, they're going to go, dude, you were on meth. And it's like, look, yes, people do tweak out on meth, but meth is not like accidentally, ingesting half a sheet of acid.
Correct.
You're just on speed. It's methamphetamine. But, you know, everybody is convinced, the whole nation, the whole world is convinced now that through Hollywood and through, you know, the psychiatric industry, that just with a little bit of stress or lack of sleep, you can hallucinate full body apparitions and whatever else. And it's just not true, you know?
So, absolutely. Right. So I think that stuff was A, in there, and then B, because it's bacteria and fungus, those things really like a lot of sugar and an acidic body.
Absolutely.
And people are on drugs, they're tending to not eat for periods of time and not drink enough water. Body acidity goes up. And then when they come down, like consuming a good amount of sugar and whatnot. And so that thrives and sort of, it's kind of like creating, it's all very, very similar to the way like candida or yeast, fungus, and parasites.
Absolutely. Right.
Like a GMO, it's like a hybrid GMO nanotech version of like a candida overgrowth infection that turns into like fungal roots poking through the gut lining and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, for me, when I changed my diet, like what happened for me first was I changed my diet, then I got clean from drugs, and then all of this stuff really started to sort of clear up for me. But what happened was at first it was like what you said, right? It was this, how do you say it?
The Trionella,
and then this sort of fungal kind of thing. And I started to get these, like, it's funny because I once read this paper, and it was a good paper, and it disappeared from the internet, on something like called like the seed and crystal, like sort of document. It was seeds and crystals on, because it looked like a little poppy seed, and then like almost like a little crystal kind of like, but like fiberglass. Like I've seen you talk about the fiberglass French fry kind of. Right. And that's exactly I've had those things that look exactly like that poke out of my skin before. But before they get to that phase, like when they're just starting, they just look like a tiny little crystal. And this paper went into how all of this stuff grows. And it's very in line with what you sort of say about it. So I read that document, and I had found some of these little black dots in my body and then these little crystals. And I'm like, okay. And then at a certain point, years later, like that was one phase. And then years later, it started to be this stuff that was really more like, I'm going to be careful with my language here based on, I'd like the show to go on YouTube so more people can see it.
Right.
But certain components that were on something that you poke yourself in the nose with for a reason that we've been with for the last. There was a paper from Johns Hopkins that came out that showed pictures of something on there. I'll send you a link to what I'm talking about later. If you don't know it, I'll include the link to the article sort of below. But there were components that are of a metallic looking nature, right? That the shape of a star that do a certain thing where they like wrap around and grab on, right? And for years, I was pulling these things out of my body, and it was like a bloody mess and whatever, right?
Sure, and then, yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about.
I'm talking about, right? Yeah. And when this document came out early, like sometime around like late summer 2020, right? Where I saw on the test or on the Q-tips, we'll just pretend it was Q-tips, the same thing that I had pulled out of my body all those years before. I was like, okay, like this is now they're ready to deploy to absolutely everybody who either missed it from when it fell from the sky or weren't drug users or whatever.
Right. Well, it seems that it was working its way. See, with what happens with the average person or used to, it gets on the skin or it gets on the scalp. It works its way down. It gets in the eyebrows. Then it gets into the nostrils and the nose. And then it goes into the sinuses. And then it goes into the inner ears. Then it goes into, it can get past the blood-brain barrier. I had a friend that died like that. But it goes lymphatic. And then once it goes lymphatic, it wreaks havoc just like sporotrichosis does. But the difference is they're giving it to these people straight to the vein. So it's going right to the bloodstream, right to everything. And it is pretty hardcore. I would not want that directly sent to my blood.
Yeah.
You know, that is
for the months before there was something that they could poke you with in the veins, they were poking it up the nostril.
Right.
And having that, and that'll go right blood brain. It's just like doing a lot.
Right. And
like
that's what's crazy is it starts with the all the sinuses and a sinus infection in everybody. Like when my ears were doing had the artificial tinnitus, when that began, about a week later, before all the other stuff, I had a faucet running out of my right nostril 24/7. It was like there was just water leaking out of my nostril all the time. So it all started within my sinuses.
Yep.
And it's funny that they're using a tool that puts these fibers right up into the sinuses. And there was a free test kit that was just sent to us a week ago, as an experiment, because they were offering to send free testing kits home.
Right.
And it came with these swabs that are in a little package. Each one has its own little hermetically sealed package. And I took the microscope to it, and it's full of the stuff.
Same shit, right? Yep.
Yeah. So they're just waiting for you to get it in your sinuses, in your nose, because that's where it begins. It's really crazy. But yeah, you're totally right.
Okay, so can you just explain to people the process of like building the sort of radio system, the crystal radio network in the body, and then how that begins to interact with the sounds, and then you and I were talking a little bit about the recording, start explaining how this basically field is put together and how these two things interact, if you could.
Okay, that's all right. So the field exists everywhere. It's like people visualize this as a beam, and they go, oh, well, this feels like a beam, like something's beaming me. But ELF locks on. That's just what it does. And there are studies back from the early 90s that talk about, independent scientists doing these ELF studies, and they lock on. ELFs will lock on to a human within, a few seconds. Will just lock on. So I think that's where that feeling comes from. But the field is everywhere. But what they do is it's a GMO fungus and it's a GMO Shmonella that begins this process that's everywhere. You could call it, and chemtrail chaff that exists. People have said, hey, this is chaff, not chemtrails. That the Air Force test is strangely generally made up of aluminum or fiberglass, which fiberglass can be substituted with graphene. So there you go with that. So what it does is you get infected with this Shmonella and this GMO fungus, and it begins. So like I said, it begins on the skin, then gets in the sinuses, and this is a slow process. It happens over probably it could be 10 or 15 years, and you will begin to have symptoms: dry skin, psoriasis, whatever the symptoms are, and you'll be taking topical creams or doing whatever your doctor says. And it will, if it ever happens, if you ever even put it together, it will be years later before you realize that those symptoms are not what you thought they were. And then it takes years for this to build up. So there are many people that have it. In the summertime, when people don't have as many clothes on, I see it on people all the time, on the backs of their arms, on their legs, on their calves, on their ankles, everywhere. So it gets on, it gets into the follicle, it gets into hair follicles, it gets into pores. And as this stuff builds up, it is radio conductive. And it actually forms what I started calling dirty boards, which is basically like a dirty circuit board. Because all a circuit board is a map of connections. And when you have these layers of basically glue, let me explain this. What begins to happen on the skin is you have this film that can practically be invisible. Like you won't even see it. You may think you have dry skin. Generally, the dry skin or glazed donut, or it may be even invisible look, is actually this stuff, and you don't realize it. It becomes a glue. And when you take a shower, it softens it up, but it doesn't come off. It's like you have a jellyfish almost living on your skin. And then what happens is this stuff gets down into that and festers. And it really likes hair follicles, and it really likes pores. But it gets in between this stuff. So you'll have these doctors saying nothing can pass the skin. That's ridiculous. This whole idea is ridiculous. Case closed. But what they're not realizing is it's not passing the skin. It's sitting in between your skin and the top of the biofilm, and it collects in there. Like people will pull out, not only this stuff, but lint and whole hairs, like, foot long hairs that have coiled themselves up and they didn't even notice that it was in their skin. Just really bizarre stuff. But after, it's different, just like the flu, just like symptoms of the flu are different with everybody. The buildup and the symptoms are always different, but eventually when the person comes online, they'll begin to have either an artificial tinnitus, or they'll hear a hum, or they'll start to feel shocks or get cramps. And then at that point, you are quote unquote online with this, and it begins to interact with you and basically wreak havoc on you, depending on if you are connected to even people that are connected to AI chatterbots. A lot of those people, and that's what they don't tell you, is a lot of these schmooters and people that go crazy are actually connected to this, and it always starts with artificial tinnitus.
Okay, so let's pause there for a second. We're going to come back to that and talk about what happens when people start expressing the result, that what they start to express behaviors based on what's going on with the interaction of the sounds and this technology. But I want to ask you a couple of things first. So the tinnitus, like when you talked about the artificial tinnitus, and you talked about when you got sort of hit with some of it back, like in the beginning of your sort of experience, right? Mm-hmm. I've never been a person, like I know people who say they have it all the time. I know people who like have had experiences, like we're just an experience of it. The only way I've ever had it is like, I will feel it for like a few seconds, right? Like the last time I had it was actually a few weeks ago, sitting in the same spot I'm sitting. I was doing a show with my friend Michael Wan, and it was interesting what we were talking about when it happened, right? But I had I had two right back to back that like came on. It almost felt like I felt pressure change in my head, and that, very sharp hum or kind of, I don't know how to exactly describe the sound. It happened kind of twice in a row, each time for just a few seconds. And then maybe 20 or 30 minutes later, again, one time. When it happens, that was the last time it happened. When it happens, it's kind of like that. I've never had any ongoing thing for more than a few minutes.
Right.
Other strange sensations that felt frequency related. But the tinnitus one for me has never been serious, but I know lots of people who it is. When you experience, is it ongoing, or do you just get it momentarily as well?
Well, back then it was 24/7, and it would change. What it would do is it would change from an 8,000 hertz and 11,000 hertz tone to if I stayed in one spot, stayed still and didn't move. Like, let's say I was really tired and passed out on the couch for like an hour, and I was sitting up. When I woke up in a sitting position, it would sound like cicadas were in stereo going back and forth between my ears.
Oh, wow.
And then as I got up and moved around, it would fade away. And the other thing that would happen that was crazy is if I climbed a ladder really fast, it would instantly go away. Or if I was out building one of my cars, I would jump underneath the car to fix something really quick or check something out underneath the car. And when I got on the cement floor really quick, it would vanish. And then it would come back after I stood up and walked around another 10 minutes or so. So it would eventually start finding you again. But I knew there was something really artificial about that right away. And it wasn't, the tones were obviously not, natural tones to be hearing, right, as ear ringing. But also when I would if I turned around really fast, like if I did a 180 and started walking in the other direction, that would also kill it out. So I knew back then that this was totally artificial. But then as I got through and got rid of this stuff out of my body, now I only get it once in a while. if I'm coming into the house after I haven't been here for a while. I'll
Inf-
just get blasted with it for about 15 minutes and then it'll go away.
Okay. I also want to ask you about, so for my girlfriend here is sitting and she had a question and I know the answer to it, but she was asking about like the Borax Bath that it works I've heard you talk about that before. I know you were doing sort of that with like salt and bath and borax and stuff for a period of time, super hot water. But that's the film that you're talking about is what the Borax Bath is for, correct?
Yeah, what you need to use to really break it down is what the old timers used, and it's Epsom salt and a little bit of borax.
Yeah.
And when you use the Epsom salt, you want to put a lot in, like you get an 8-pound bag and put like 3-4 pounds in, and then just dive in and just soak. And if you rub, eventually it's going to start coming loose, and you're gonna rub it, and it's just like a wet scab or a sunburn. It's identical to that in every way, the way it rolls off. It will just begin to roll off in layers. And you're thinking, how could I not know that was on my skin?
Well, because it's like a false, like what it reminds me of, because I know what you're talking about when you see it on people. What it looks like is like when we were little and we'd put like glue on our skin and then peel it off.
Yeah. Right? Elmer's glue, and it would be clear. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And then when it rolls. So yeah. Okay. So I just wanted to clarify. She had asked me that. So a couple of things you said about the way some of this. Okay. So we talked about the tinnitus. I want to get into a little bit more like the sound field in just a second and how it works and like some of the stuff with the different frequencies and the layers. But quickly, you had something in a video I was listening to the other day where you were talking about the people thinking that they're hearing like sounds coming out of their vents, right?
Yes.
Kind of thing. So, and you were talking a few minutes before about fly ash or coal ash with the chemtrails kind of stuff, right? Mm-hmm. So one of the things that a lot of people have told me about, but I've experienced myself, there's an area behind where I grew up in Los Angeles that if you were to go over that mountain range, you'd be in an area where a lot of the sort of anomalous UFO or aerial kind of phenomena are spotted, right? But there's also a lot of weird spraying that goes on back there that isn't your typical looking chemtrails. It is this weird, like I always referred to it as black particle tech.
Sure.
But that was before I knew. Now that like I'm thinking about it and what you're talking about, it could be these sort of graphene fungal kinds of things, or right. But it was like a black particle tech, or what it reminded me of was like Etch-a-Sketch or Magnadoodle, right? And there would be like, so it would be there, and then it seemed to like gather or form into like shapes or like a formation, like a school of birds kind of thing, and move in a certain direction. Like I've had some strange things I've seen and experienced with that. But I also, and this was one of the, I've had people ask me about this over the years, if I had it right. And I knew what they were talking about, because one thing that would happen to me when I would be coming down from meth, like after being up for a couple of days, I would be laying in my bed, and on my bed, on the wall right across, there was a vent. And I would start to see these black dots, kind of come out sort of in formation, kind of like if you ever watched the TV series Lost, when there would be those sort of like organized black particles that sort of came out of a place. And
sure.
And my cat would be in the bed, and I could tell she saw them too. I only ever saw them when I was in the state between high and not high, like coming down. And they'd out of the vent, and they would sort of come out and they'd be moving towards me. There was no sound for me or anything like that, right? But they just sort of moved sort of in formation, and eventually I'd forget about it and go to sleep. But I'd sit there with my cat and watch them for a bit. And like I correlated them. It's interesting because you talk a lot about dirty boards and dirty electricity, and I'm sure you're familiar with lily waves, right?
Yes, absolutely.
To me, it seemed like once I understood about lily waves, that I was sort of somehow like whatever that state is between high and not high on meth, it takes you into a different frequency field, and you can kind of see the shit normally only your cat sees, right?
Right.
And that it's these particles in the air being sort of kind of coming into contact with these sort of lily waves or these layered frequencies you're talking about. Is that it?
Well, there's a lot of factors to this, and it's so hard to get through them all. You have to think about water or sand and how people would use vibrations to create these patterns. Have you ever seen that? And one would look like a flower if they used, 7.83 hertz or whatever frequency they're using, they get these geometrical patterns. It's like infrasound has a big effect on matter, on all matter. You can stop the breathing of human beings with ELF at 166 decibels. They can't even hear it, but that you can stop, or you can take control of their breathing with infrasound. It can do just about anything. So when this stuff is reacting with ELF and dirty electricity coming into the house, because that's what they were really smart about, these quote unquote smart meters, when they came in, our old meters had filters on them that would block out all this dirty electricity. The dirty electricity is what the smart meter uses to read these appliances and tell which frequency is being used. So if you use your blow dryer too much, they're going to tell you, hey, you're using your blow dryer too much. You could turn it down. But it's also being used for this type of tech. And once the smart grid came in, now you have massive dirty electricity fields everywhere that can interact with these particles. And then it can do things in the home, including creating pressure changes and humidity changes, massive humidity changes that can make it look like someone is entering the house or doing something creepy in your house when it's not. It can interact with the air. It can make it feel like someone is breathing on you. It can interact with the particles. It could actually possibly line them up exactly like you just said.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the possibilities, the real possibilities with real science that most people that are even into science and don't know it, the possibilities are endless.
Okay. So the stuff that's in people's bodies and on their skin, right? It's on their skin and in their bodies because it gets into the sinus and all that kind of stuff. It starts organizing itself into some sort of like receiver or circuit board type of thing.
Yeah, it builds up in layers.
All of this sort of field that is like sort of naturally occurring, like it exists in nature, but because of things that have been done now to sort of increase the amount of dirty electricity flying around everywhere, as well as people becoming aware of being able to bounce frequencies off of each other, and whether they're intentionally doing this to create this or they're doing it for some other reason and this is the side effect. There's all of this like increased amount of chaos. And of course, there's all of the other frequencies that people are 5G and Wi-Fi and that all of this is just creating an ever increasing cacophony of noises that you're becoming ever more sensitive to receive.
Right. Okay. You eventually you literally go online, so to speak. You become fully sensitized to it. And it's strange because there are people that have symptoms that don't think that they are nefarious or overt symptoms, that just call themselves like, what is it, electromagnetic hypersensitivity, or whatever they call it. And it's the same thing. It's all the same thing. So the whole system.
Would you say, and this is like, so I have a friend who's a skin health expert, right? Like he's amazing. Like he has helped people cure like skin disease that no one else could get a grip on and whatever. He had never heard of Morgellons, right? But he was like, doesn't surprise me at all. Like the skin does and seems to generate all of these weird kinds of things, and exactly the diet that he used with his clients to help them overcome rosacea, psoriasis, eczema, all that kind of stuff is basically exactly the same diet that helped me to get rid of this stuff. Right. So like all of these things that this has probably been around longer than even you and I realize. And all of that people are thinking are just sad but normal human diseases and related to food allergies or poor genetics or not taking care of yourself. There's truth to all of that on some level because it exacerbates it, but it's just the endless array of ways that this expresses itself.
Oh, absolutely. Everything is almost every illness these days, or conditions and all this, even the mental stuff, is a byproduct of this happening. It's absolutely a byproduct of it.
Okay, so can you like get into a little bit more the way, like the stuff that I think the really unique piece that you bring to this is this ability, because of your interest in sound and music and stuff like this in general, to really break down like how these things are all coming together, and how like there's the background field and then there's these other like kinds of sounds that, whether nefarious or not, whether intentional or not, ride along some of the even naturally occurring sounds and create these like almost like streams, like, or almost like feeds, right? Almost like we have an RSS feed or like a YouTube feed or a social media feed, like these like sound
Right.
that come together. Like, so you have a person who like, you know, is either has a lot of this going on in their body, or they feel like they're sensitive. And then they come to this place where they feel like they're being swarmed or attacked or harassed or targeted or whatever. And all of these things come together for this like endless array of stuff that, you know, can lead them to become agitated. And I want to talk about agitation again.
Yeah, right. Yeah, well, it's a parasitic signal, and it is, and I can prove it 1,000 times over. When I discovered it, I was listening to noises and people making noises as well, recordings of people making noises in their sleep or doing whatever. And I realized that there was a sound on top of the sound. Really, it's almost as quick as a cell phone call, but when I really looked at it, they're not deadlocked. It's about maybe 100 or 200 milliseconds before it really kicks in. But once it's there, it's there. And a friend of mine came over and he had just bought a brand new phone. And I said, dude, that's brand new. It hasn't been messed with. I go, let me record in my bedroom for like 5 minutes. So we turned it on and threw it in the bedroom right on the bed. And we just sat out here quietly. And while it was recording, he coughed. So this was a long time ago. When we listened back to the recording, I wanted him to hear it. And it was awesome that he coughed, because when he did, you could hear this scream over the top of it. And he was like, wow, it's almost like there's a sample over my cough. And I was like, exactly, dude. But then 3 minutes into the recording, you hear this electrostatic noise, and then you couldn't hear any more of what was going on. It wasn't until I got digital recorders here that didn't have wireless capabilities that I could actually catch it. But it's a parasitic sound, and these frequencies ride on other frequencies. So let's say that I create the note B, and like a low B, and I'm letting that hum, the noise is going to instantly jump on and start creating other sounds that are very similar to B and other sound, but it's all going to be either talking or noises. But it's going to be in those same root tones that you create. And that's why when people use like white noise machines or pink noise machines or rain or whatever, or fans, they can hear voices and notes and tones in them, because that noise is so many frequencies that it allows the full spectrum to hop on and start to propagate. So it doesn't matter how loud or how quiet the sound is, whatever it is, it's going to jump on it. I've got it documented on garbage trucks, where you can hear these big ass garbage trucks roll through, picking up these cans and then dumping them. And then you can actually hear these other sounds riding over the top of it. It works really well with engine noise. If you record engine noise, engine hum, road noise, all that works really well. It's a parasitic signal that is it's jumping onto, it's not propagating from the electrical grid, but it is using the electrical grid as well.
Okay, so is it kind of like if I had a large magnet, right? And I walked into your garage or your workshop, and there was like a piece of metal there, or like another magnet, right? Like kind of thing that would catch on to it, right? It would pick that up. But also, if you happen to have metal shavings of different kinds around there, if it was a strong magnet, it would pull those towards it as well, even though that wasn't what you were trying to pick up. You were just trying to pick up nails, but it picked up metal shavings too.
Right. It's similar. It's like, because the only difference is the magnet is like one source, and this signal is a field, and it's
okay.
Let me try to explain this. It's like an open call, like an open cell phone connection, 24/7 everywhere.
Okay.
And that's the best eye of God weapon, because they've talked about the eye of God weapon for years. Okay. That's the best eye of God weapon you could ever have, because sound is way better than visuals.
Okay.
You know, you can watch a movie for free on the plane, but they charge you for the sound. You know what I mean? Right. So it's the same thing. Sound is so much more beneficial to surveillance.
Yep.
And you can use it for everything. So if you have this open cell phone call everywhere and the field is everywhere, part of those voices could be disguising and I guess scrambling the return signal so that you can't tell what's being recorded too. There's a lot of aspects to this where that could be literally monitoring, just monitoring all the time and sending that signal back over. It's recreating the other sound and then sending a digital version back.
Well, it is.
You know what I'm saying? It's very crazy.
It's occurred to me before that, like, you know, we don't have any idea like where the fuck we actually are and what we're actually living in, right? But when we're out there, like, especially with all the things that have been done to the sky for the past, you know, several decades, that literally that the air like could just be like a bunch of speakers or
right. It's conductive.
Right. And so like everything, like, you know, it's like, you know, God is watching you or God is listening, and it's the air, it's the environment, and every breath you take, every sound you make while we watching you isn't just a song. And, right. But it isn't like somebody sitting there with the surveillance camera. It's like this complete total awareness environment.
Right. It's a computer. And so someone can break in or monitor it. Right. But it's a surveillance system. I guarantee you that, and I haven't found the proof yet, but that's what it was originally created for, was a surveillance system. And it was probably invented by somebody who had people's best intentions in mind. And what they wanted to do was put this out in the desert, because it's seismic, it works seismically too. Put this out in the desert, put this out in national parks. And if somebody were lost, they could actually know either where you were at, or with this two-way communication, they could guide you to safety without a phone, because it's an open phone connection, basically. You get what I'm saying? It's really intense. So it's quite possible that this was created with good intentions, but somebody just put it everywhere.
Yep. No,
because it's everywhere. I haven't been to a place yet and done recording and came back and analyzed it where it wasn't there. Yeah. It's everywhere.
Okay. So I want to give you a couple of like, what do you think of this is real fast? And then I want to talk a little bit about the issue of how the community of people who are either aware of this or in some way experiencing it, like how they have been used against their own self based on a victimization, you know, sort of narrative, and like what we need to do about this, like, right. But first I want to ask you, there's three like kind of anomalous things. I mean, I've experienced all sorts of weird, hairy stuff, but there's three that are just good ones that everyone can understand and that open doors to like something else could be possibly going on that I want to run by you. And I'll just do them in like sort of, okay, so these two are more recent, and then I'll take you back to something from a long time ago. So at the house that we were living in Los Angeles before we moved back here, it's a pretty old house, family home. My grandparents were the first owner of the houses when, they moved out from New York to Los Angeles. And there was two interesting, I was living in that house as it was many, many years ago when all the sort of stuff started to happen with me, like in that 2005-6 period, right? When I started having some of this weird stuff go on in my body. I was living there, but then I didn't yet live there for many years, but we were living there a couple of years ago. And at night when we'd be laying in bed trying to go to sleep, sometimes, not all the time, we'd start hearing music that sounded like it was coming from the driveway right behind our bedroom.
Always. Yeah. But it's never next to you. It's always far away.
Right. So, and of course,
never in the corner. It's always like either in the other room, downstairs, upstairs, or just outside your window in the driveway, whatever. Yeah. Go ahead.
So we would go, obviously, like, if you went outside there, not only you didn't hear it at all anymore. And it was, at first it was like, well, could it be coming from a neighbor's house? You went out there, it was totally silent. Right.
Right.
And so, okay, I'm familiar with what the topic we're talking about. So I chalked it up to that, right? Like to that. And, but we would like to tell stories about like, was there a thinning of the dimensions? Were we hearing music from like another dimension or another time or whatever, right? And it was always this like weird, like bluesy jazz kind of music. It was always the same kind of music, right? What's weird is when we cleaned out the room next to our bedroom some period of time after that, when we cleaned it out, and we found a box of records that was my grandmother's, that was that kind of music.
Right.
So almost like that music had been played there many, many, many years ago. And like somehow the sound or the resonance is stored in the field. Like,
it is.
Okay. Yeah. Because there was never any other kind of music. And then I found that's the only kind of records there were in that room were records with that kind of music that I didn't even know my grandma listened to.
Right. That's how a lot of these hauntings work. People don't realize it. Like, they'll talk, even people that are experiencing the effects of this, the victims, whatever you want to call them, will say that, no, I'm hearing loved ones' voices. Well, that's because, you've talked around them, that's easy. So what they do is everywhere it's recording and logging sounds everywhere of music being played, of the door, of your sink, of everything in the house, everything in everybody's house. And then for whatever reason, if the AI chooses to do it, whether it's because of, or a person chooses to do it, it will begin to project those sounds back into the living area. And that creates these haunted house symptoms that can be really, really convincing. Like really convincing. Like we've heard people run across our attic before, and there was no one there, and the only person that could run across my attic would have to be like 18 inches tall because it's a really short attic. So literally we were laughing about it because it's like, who could be running up there with a leg span to jump, from rafter to rafter, but still be 18 inches tall. It didn't make sense, but good try. I've lived places where it sounded like, at my old house that I grew up in, right before I moved out of there, I was renting it for a while before I moved here. And it sounded like a lot of things happened there, but it sounded like someone dropped a piano on the house. And the house shook, and I thought for sure a tree had fell on the house. And I went out and looked, and there was nothing there, and nothing fell. It was just this big ELF boom. Which strangely, the same thing happened to me in the apartment that I was living in like 3 months before that. So it goes on and on. But yeah, it will project sounds. It will learn sounds from the house, music, everything, and project them back into the house. And also, when these frequencies are building up, if you're in a acoustically conductive area, just happens to be where they are bouncing off the right things, and you can hear the hum, or you can hear the the frequencies of it, it can sound like music, chanting, monks,
Yep.
metal, all kinds of different sounds.
Before we've heard the monks chanting. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
it's, go ahead.
Okay. And that would also say that this has been going on since like the 50s or the 60s, because that's
I would say 60s.
We're from,
right?
And my grandmother would have been listening it to that time. So that's fascinating. That not only that it's storing it, it's like this endless hard drive of files that can be called up at any moment, right? That's fascinating. The other,
because our technology is doled out to us in these little crumbs.
Yes,
like it's almost as if, and I don't like to do a whole lot of theorizing, but it's almost as if the technology that we're given is only given to us because it's already been weaponized in one way or another. So it's like, they can have this now.
I'll say that's how it is, right? People, well-meaning, in like brilliant, innocent people start experimenting with something because they have an idea. And even sometimes the idea is for one thing, but what they actually discover is something else, right? Some, sick person comes and swoops up their patent, like they apply for the patent and they say, oh, you can't do this because of whatever. The government or a corporation grabs it, they weaponize it. Once they've maxed out their use on it in terms of either a new technology comes along or enough people have figured it out, then they offer it back to the peons as something that will benefit them.
Right.
Right.
And that's exactly what happens. It's like that. And same thing with the electrical grid became weaponized, but I don't think selling Wi-Fi signals were really introduced, and we want to blanket the entire earth with these until they had a real reason to do it. And once they did, they were like, you know what, we need to get these everywhere. So you have, the 60s, I definitely think it started in the 60s, and then it went through, and then in the 90s we had, chemtrails, HAARP, the hum, all started. And then once Wi-Fi and cell signals blanketed the globe, you had an explosion in this stuff. And everybody I talked to, everybody has had one experience or another with this, either hearing a ghost singing in the house they were renting, or hearing singing coming from the fan, or music, or chanting, or people talking, or some type of experience. Everybody has been affected by this, but it really affects people in their sleep. But everybody has had like some type of experience with this for sure.
So what you were saying about the girl sleeping before and people making noises, like I'm thinking about like, I've known people who sleepwalk and sleep talk. But most of the people I've known who've done that lived on the same block that I grew up on, where a lot of weird shit happened to me, right? Like my dad's ex-wife and her kids, they had never been sleepwalkers or before.
They just started.
They became sleep eaters. They were all eating like Cocoa Puffs in the middle of the night and shit like that.
Yep.
Right? Like, and this kid that lived down the street from me, like he woke up about to knock on our door in the middle of the night one time because like he thought he and I were getting married. Right. Like, and he was going to be at the wedding and shit like that. Right. But this was apparently a regular kind of occurrence for him, that he was going through this crazy sleepwalking. So I don't know if and this is the house with that, where I saw the black particle tech and the lily wave, from the lily waves and all this kind of stuff. Okay. So in that same house that I was telling you about the music, which is a different house, right? The house with the music out in the back driveway, when you'd be in the shower, not all the time, only sometimes when you would be in the shower, you could hear a police siren coming through the shower head.
Yeah, I absolutely believe it. And it's probably the reason why it was only once in a while is because there was something happening, either, and that could be is something as simple as the neighbor using their washer, or a car parked in a certain way, or any myriad of factors. But that could totally be because of one little acoustically helping incident. And so once in a while you're picking it up and noticing that it's there, and then other times you're just not noticing it at all. But it's always there.
It's bouncing off of something else that's there this time but not next time.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So so those were the more recent ones, and then these things that happened back. This was like in around 1999, 2000, right? So two things happened. Actually, they both involve my brother, which is kind of interesting. So one of them was we had been to a party. This is like back in like the rave days in the late 90s.
Oh
We
yeah.
had been to a party, and like on a Saturday night, and then on Sunday night, like I was still up, I had been partying, I was still up, but on Sunday night, I was in the garage doing laundry, right? And I swear the washing machine was playing a song that this DJ Bad Boy Bill had played at the party. And it was like a very like interesting song, like, right? Like it was like, it had this catchy, and the streets are gonna rock, all right? And the streets are gonna rock tonight. And it had like horn and whatever. And I could hear it in the washing machine. And I'd leave, I go out of the garage, I go in the hallway, I don't hear it. I go back into the garage, I hear the song coming from the washing machine.
Yep.
I had been, I had done acid and meth and whatever. So I'm writing it off to drugs and stuff like that, right? A few weeks later, I'm talking to my brother, and he's like, dude, the other day I was doing laundry, and I swear to God, the washing machine was playing that Bad Boy Bill song from the party. So this was a couple weeks after. It was during the week. He wasn't still up from the party, right? Like, what the, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like that.
Well, it creates an illusion. So then people will, you get these people that go, they're looping my thoughts or whatever.
Right.
And I'm getting my thoughts played back to me, or, all this stuff. And what it sounds like happened is simple, because this is like I said, it's a parasitic signal. It will begin to shoot these sounds back in. That's a crazy story. What happens is you were there. It's tracking people as well by your walking gait, by all kinds of different seismic activity, your voice, you have a voice print, you have a walking gait. So it tracked you. You were there. That music was playing. You're back at that house. It can also shoot those sounds that were around you. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it has nothing to do with looping somebody's thoughts back to them. And then what's happening is it's a washing machine, and it's a parasitic signal. So it's riding on the vibrations of the washing machine and on the dirty electricity in there. And it's creating these very real frequencies. Man, I wish, like digital recorders were around back then, because I would have loved to pull the music out of that.
All right. So that
would have been awesome.
And then same brother, a few months later, different party, right? And we went to this party that was at the National Orange Show. It's like a huge place, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we were in this one building, and I had to go to the bathroom. And like where I had to go to the bathroom was probably at least a football field or more walk away, right? Me and my brother were both on acid, right? I go by myself to go to the bathroom. The bathroom are like a porta potty, which it's an interesting noises you hear when you're in the porta potty, especially when there's electronic music being played around. But I was more than a football field away. And when I'm going to the bathroom, I can hear my brother talking. He's still back in the building where I left him. I can completely hear the entire conversation he's having. So when I go back to him, I was like, I could hear you all the way in the bathroom. I was like, did you say this? And he's like, yeah, that's what we were talking about.
That is amazing, because I don't doubt it. And here's why. I'm not even going to mention the exact frequency right now, but I found one frequency where I was playing it through headphones and listening to it. And it's one sine wave frequency in the ELF range. And suddenly I'm playing it, and I could hear not the mid-range tones, but the low bass and the high end of the TV in the other room. And I listened to this for about 2 minutes to verify that it was the TV. And generally I cannot hear the TV with headphones on playing a signal that loud in headphones. Mm-hmm. I took the headphones off, and I couldn't hear anything.
Yep.
I put them back on, and I can hear. And that was the point where I figured out the carrier signal that is picking up a lot of the stuff.
I only heard him when I was in the porta potty. Like when I was walking from the place to the porta potty, I didn't hear him. Right.
So you're acoustically in the porta potty with that those weird round, semi-round roofs or whatever, it could have been creating a acoustically perfect situation for you to hear. And he verified everything that you heard.
Right. It was a very particular conversation. Right. And so like, you know, it was incredible. Right. So these, like, I mean, my point, like, I don't know. I mean, you throw acid into the mix and that sometimes seems to give people extended abilities. Right.
Sure. You were locked onto that frequency.
I don't think it's just one thing. And I think that's probably the most important thing about your work. It's this coming together of all of these different things that is creating a phenomena that everyone is experiencing, whether they're aware of it or not. And your own particular like heightened awarenesses or sensitivities, like you may lock on to something and it begins to feel like it's a really personal experience to you, but it's really not. That field is affecting everyone. It's just they're not aware of it, or they're not at that moment like tapped in or it's sensitive. And some people are just like super thick and dense. They just don't.
Right.
Like they're like, you know, something going on, a building exploding right next to them, and they're just like do, right?
Yeah, there are people that are never going to understand this or be able to even comprehend it. It's like a Commodore 64 trying to run Windows. It's just not going to happen. You know what I mean? So it's really hard for those people to even get it. But there are people that everybody is being affected by this. Yeah. So there are no TIs. You know what I mean? There are people that are being overtly affected by it, but everybody is being affected by it one way or another, even if it's just in their sleep. But they're being affected by it even when they're awake. They just don't know it.
Okay, so let's do this. We've been going for about an hour. Let's take a quick break. My bladder needs. Let's take a quick break. We're going to move over into the patron segment. I want to talk a little bit about what you just talked about right there, like that this, you know, this TI scenario and sort of how that's been created and maybe how we need to shift it. And then if we have time, we can move into talking a little bit about how music is also used in this. If we don't, I'll have you back another time because I enjoy talking to you and we can talk forever about music. So let's take a quick break. Before we do, for the people who aren't going to join us on the other side, let them know where they can find your work and whatnot.
YouTube, I think it's, what is it? YouTube.com/Lookoutfa Charlie, I think, or is it users and then Lookout for Charlie? Or you can just search it.
Yeah. I'll link it.
It's Lookoutfa Charlie without the for, or lookoutforcharlie.com.
All right, cool. So if you would like to join us on the other side, for the rest, go to patreon.com/offplanetmedia or emilymoyer.locals.com. We will see you on the other side.